Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives. And I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I've been an economics professor all my life, and that, I hope, has helped me prepare for these programs. Today I want to do a special kind of program, a program devoted to a topic that is becoming more and more important in the world, but particularly here in the United States. I take my clue from a recent poll by NBC and the Wall Street Journal, who worked together on these polls. And this poll showed that 25% of voting Americans believe that socialism is an attractive quality in a candidate when they think about who they're going to vote for. Well, that kind of blew my mind. After over half a century of endlessly demonizing anything and everything having to do with socialism, that 1/4 of the American voting population feels they would be drawn to a candidate who said of himself or herself, "I'm a socialist," tells you something about change in America beyond what a million other surveys might show. So socialism is on the agenda. And so I think it might be useful to become clearer than the most of the conversation has been about what socialism means. I wish I could sit here and tell you that this is the definition of socialism. But if I did such a thing, you should turn the program off and go elsewhere. Because anybody who tells you that this is socialism is either ignorant or misleading you. Socialism has been around for 150 years. It has spread all over the world, and the end result, inevitably, is that different people mean different things by that term. Look, capitalism is what we call the economy in the United States. It's also what the leaders of Saudi Arabia call their economic system. And it's also what the people in Ireland call theirs, and it's also what the people in Nigeria call theirs. Therefore, it obviously means different things to different people. So I want to devote this program to going over with you the three major ways this idea of socialism is understood, because those ways are relevant today. Those ways are fighting it out amongst themselves in terms of the allegiance and feelings and thoughts of people around the world, and they're going to shape our future. So here's the first one. In this view, socialism has to do with the government. That's right. The government is to come in and regulate, control a private capitalist economy. That's right, an economy governed by private enterprises owned by private citizens who trade with one another in an institution called the market, where they buy and sell their labor, their work, their products, their services. That's right, it's a capitalist economy, private enterprise, markets, but one in which the government is brought in. Some people mean socialism by that. And they mean particularly that the government is brought in a certain way. Number one, the government is to regulate what the private enterprises do so that they are less self-serving, profit-oriented, and are more socially concerned. That's why minimum wage is something socialists always supported. Many of them want there to be limits on how much prices can be raised by corporations or how much profits can be earned by them. And the second reason socialists want the government to come in is to redistribute wealth, because capitalism has this tendency to concentrate wealth in very few hands and deprive the mass of people. So the socialists want the government to come in using taxes and using government spending to do a bit of redistribution, to equalize a system that turns unequal very quickly. So for these people, socialism means that the government comes in, regulates and taxes to make what we might call capitalism because it leaves business in the hands of private enterprises and markets, but we could call it capitalism with a humane face, capitalism with a certain welfare focus, the welfare of all the people. And here are some examples. Denmark, Norway, Germany, Italy, France. Those countries are often referred to as socialist. Their governments are often governments of socialist parties, and that's what those parties mean, that they will have the government do this regulating and redistributing. That's one concept of socialism around the world. It's pretty close to what Bernie Sanders means in the United States, or what Jeremy Corbyn means in Great Britain. But here's the second one. In the second view, this first one doesn't go far enough. Because, yes, the government comes in and controls things and redistributes, but it's in a perpetual war, which the government often loses with those very private enterprises who try to get around the government regulation, who try to get around the government taxation. We're all familiar with those examples of companies, for example, Amazon, which has earned billions in profits the last 2 years and paid absolutely no taxes to the United States government. Indeed, this last year, they're getting a refund in excess of $100 million. So we know that private corporations do everything in their power to use their profits, to use their political power, to undo, to evade all of those socialistic regulations and redistributions. And this has led some socialists to say you have to go further. It isn't enough to regulate and redistribute. The government should, here we go, directly take over the enterprises. There shouldn't be private enterprises because those will always be run for the profit of the private owner. If you want the economy to serve everybody, then the agent of everybody, the government, that we all elect, at least in theory, should take over and run the businesses so they behave in the way that's good for everybody, and there isn't this perpetual war between a regulating government and private enterprise. And the same argument says we shouldn't allow the market to decide who gets what, because a market always delivers whatever is scarce to the people with the most money. It's an institution for those who are rich and who stay that way by using the market. So these socialists go further. The government should take over enterprises, literally own and operate the factories, stores, and offices, and instead of the market deciding who gets what, it should be planned in terms of what we want for the society as a whole. These kinds of socialists, after the 1920s, took the name communists to signal that they went further than the other socialists in order to take over, through the government, the apparatus of the economy. So some people mean by socialism government regulating a private capitalism to make it more humane, to make it less unequal. And other people say, no, socialism means, for them, that the government takes over the enterprise and plans the distribution of output rather than leaving it to the market. And this second group of socialists often, not always, but often takes the name communist to show how they're different from the first group. And in those kinds of examples, the Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, and for parts of their history, Cuba, Vietnam, and so on, are examples. Now let's get to the third kind of socialism that's contesting in the world today. To become the important kind, to become the kind believed in and followed by most people, to win your interest as well. And this approach is in a way an evolution out of the other two. It's a kind of critical evolution because it is advanced by people who see some merits in the first kind of socialism, government regulation, the second kind, government operating enterprises, but say we don't think that's enough in one way and it's too much in the other. Here's how it's not enough. It's not enough because it doesn't change the workplace, the place where the mass of people do their economic thing, using their brains and muscles to transform objects into the goods and services we all need to live the lives we want to live. It doesn't change it enough. Meanwhile, it does something too much. It gives too much power to the government. As a government that has this much power to regulate and redistribute, let alone a government that takes over owning and operating, is a government that runs us the risk that it'll do a lot more than these economic things, using its power for political or cultural controls of a society that we have seen and we don't want again. Well, then these kinds of socialists have a new focus. For them, what will really make a difference, what will take us beyond capitalism and be a better way of organizing society, focuses on the enterprise, the workplace. And it goes like this. We have the economic system we have, with its good points and its bad points, in large part because we don't allow democracy into the workplace. And these socialists say capitalism never did that. Capitalism is a hierarchical way of organizing an enterprise. A few people, the owner, the shareholders who have the big blocks of shares, they run capitalist enterprises. The mass of us have no control at all, and they run it for them. And the way to change society to make it better is to have the people who work in an enterprise, all of them, one person, one vote, have democratic control of the workplace as just as important as having democratic control of the community in which you live, the neighborhood in which you exist, and so on. This kind of socialism is micro-focused. It says, let's not talk only about the government and private enterprise. We don't mind private enterprise. The government doesn't have to control everything. There has to be some coordination. But the big issue for us, say these socialists, is the transformation of the workplace, the socialization of the workplace, so it becomes a community run democratically rather than something run by a small number of people who put their benefits, the so-called bottom line, as profits for them rather than a good life for everybody. Okay, those kinds of socialism are arguing with one another for your attention and your allegiance. To be interested in socialism doesn't mean you're necessarily the believer of one or the other. Most real socialist societies have mingled the control function of government with the ownership function of government. What most experiments have not done is really tried that other kind of socialism that revolutionizes the workplace, brings democracy to the workplace for the first time, and says that's the way to get beyond the limits of capitalism, its inequalities, its instabilities, its injustices. So the question that's being fought out is not the question capitalism versus socialism, or at least it's not only that. It's also a struggle going on among these different definitions and meanings of socialism that are just as important to what's going on as the so-called struggle between capitalism and socialism that was so crucial in the last 100 years. We've come to the end of the first half of Economic Update. Stay with us. There will be a continuation of this conversation when we come back. And please remember, support us on YouTube. Economic Update needs your support there. Make use of our websites, democracyatwork.info and rdwolf with 2fs.com. And as always, our special thanks to the Patreon community that supports us with its interests and its active encouragement for what we do. Our thanks.